Hi everyone, and welcome to Leeds Helpful Tips. Thank you for tuning in. Some of you know I've experienced some technical problems in the past. Hopefully today we're going to pull off without a hitch. So what we're going to talk about today is the field of view of your eyepieces. And as far as microscopy goes, this has always been one of the harder things for me to fully wrap my knowledge around. So when we look at an eyepiece, people would, I think, normally assume that if I'm looking at 10x, I see the same area on everybody's microscope at 10x. And the reality of that is that's not true. That eyepieces actually come with different field of view numbers. And what a field of view number is describing is the active area of that eyepiece. Inside the modern eyepiece, about 10 to 13 millimeters below the top of your eye tube, which would be right here, there's a real image that is formed. And in fact, if we were to look inside of there, there is actually a restrictive ring, and that ring controls the size of the eyepiece. Now, it has to be supported by the optics themselves, but the ring ultimately is what defines the edge of our field of view. We put that ring in there for a couple reasons. Number one, because it's a real image plane, and so the human eye does not like our field of view to just sort of softly fall off the edge. We like to see a hard edge to our field of view. And so that's why they make a very nice sharp ring at that field plane inside the eyepiece. It also is actually, typically in a focusing eyepiece, it's actually a area that's able to accept a reticle as well. So if you can imagine, if the edge of that field of view in our eyepiece determines a focal plane, which is what we just said, then what I want to do, if I want to image a ruler or some other type of grid pattern or whatever you might want on a reticle, then when I print that reticle, I want it to actually come into contact with that ring so that they're both in the same field plane. That'll put the real image of my microscope into the same plane as my reticle. Okay? Little bit of side note. But here's the part I have a hard time wrapping my head around. I can put an 18 millimeter field of view eyepiece in here, and that means there's an 18 millimeter size ring in there. And I'm going to see, when I'm at 10x total magnification, I got 1x coming through the microscope at that point, and I'm going to divide by the magnification that lies below that field stop to determine the area that I'm actually viewing through the eyepiece. So I like to take 10x because it's real easy. 10x is coming from the eyepiece. 1x in some fashion or another is coming through the microscope, and that means with an 18 millimeter field of view, I'm going to see an 18 millimeter area, a circle of 18 millimeter diameter. With a 20 millimeter, I'm going to see a 20 millimeter field of view. With a 22, I'm going to see a 22 millimeter field of view. And finally, one of the exclusives with Zeiss is they've got a 23 millimeter field of view. Why does that matter to me? Well, we'll take a look at some areas in a minute, but what it means is that with an 18 millimeter field of view eyepiece, to see the same total area of my sample, I'm going to have to take more steps, more fields of view to cover that whole area. Okay? So the neat thing about it is the wider my field of view is, the greater the area that I'm going to see at any given magnification. So we're going to hop over here a minute. We're going to take a look at just a few pictures of some eyepieces that I've gathered. So hopefully what you're seeing right now is actually the eyepiece itself. There's a picture of an old AO eyepiece there. Oh, we're not working here. There we go. Here, the first picture you're going to see, it says 10x wide field. This is actually an old American optical eyepiece. Wide field at that time, I believe, represented an 18mm field of view. Could have been a 16mm, but 18. We go on to the next one. This is actually a Nikon eyepiece. Again, they don't define it for us, but it says it's a wide field. Here's an older model Olympus Eyepiece, 20. So I'm sorry, I should explain this. The 10x is the magnification. The number after that /20 is representing that field of view number. Here's actually a 22mm field of view eyepiece. WHN is a series of abbreviation, wide field, 10x. The -H is actually standing for, I believe at this point, a focusing eyepiece, and then finally the 22mm field of view. You'll also see in this case a little pair of glasses there. You know, if we really take a look at what's changed in eyepieces over the last 50 years or so, number one, the eye point, the eye relief point, the point at how far your eyeball needs to be away from that eyepiece has grown. The area of acceptance for that has increased. So if you were to get enough light to come through the microscope and you held a nice white sheet of paper up in front of that eyepiece, you would actually find a point which is the eyepiece or eye point by moving that paper back and forth until you had a nice sharp circle of light. Okay? So what did I just say? Well, in the old eyepieces you had to almost bury your eyeball into the eyepiece to be able to be at the proper height and get it in focus. And if you moved your head even a little bit, typically you would tend to lose your image or start to see a black ring or whatever. That area of acceptance has also grown over the years. So it's easier on us to sit in front of the microscope because we've pulled back away from the eyepiece and we don't need to hold our head and neck so rigidly to maintain a nice sharp field of view in the microscope. In fact, in this particular case where you're seeing that set of glasses up there, they're actually saying that the eye relief, the amount that you're going to sit away from the eyepiece, is sufficient enough that you should be able to wear your eye glasses while looking through the microscope if you want to. Okay? Here's actually, this is from the 22mm field of view eyepiece I just showed you. And what you can see is I'm actually measuring the diameter of that ring. This is a little plastic sleeve that threads up into the microscope, and it's got a shelf on it for my reticle to sit in. So that's what I was trying to show you in that picture there. Here we are with the king of field of view at 23mm field of view. In this particular case, it also says pole because it's an eyepiece with a critical crosshair in it. And of course, we're seeing the glasses again there. Here I'm trying to show you inside that eyepiece to where that field of view ring actually is sitting, but I just can't get as sharp a picture as I did when that other eyepiece had a sleeve that actually pulls out there. We got to remember that we're looking at areas underneath an eyepiece. Our CAD drawer did this neat little drawing for me here, and what you see is a series of concentric circles, the smallest being an 18mm field of view. The next one up obviously is 20mm field of view, finally a 22, and then the 23mm field of view. And again, you say, well, why do I care about this, Kevin? Why are we going through this? So let's just go through a little bit of nomenclature here. So the common nomenclature to describe the effective viewing area of an eyepiece includes different terms. That would be field of view, which you may see abbreviated as FOV, or with actual periods after it, so it looks like a true abbreviation. Sometimes it is described as the field number of an eyepiece and may be abbreviated as FN or properly punctuated F period, N period. In other cases, they list the value on the eyepiece without any identifiers. For example, I showed you one that was 10x/22, where 22 is the available field of view. So we're back to our question again. Kevin, why are you spending this time talking about this? Well, what I want to show you is that a small field of view difference actually has a rather dramatic effect on the area that you're seeing. So I did a little bit of simple math here, remembering that the area of a circle is equal to pi r squared. And then I've listed out what an 18mm field of view would provide with a 1x objective, what a 20mm would provide, 22 and 23. So you can see we go from 254 squared millimeters on the low end and 415 on the high end, meaning that the area of a 23mm field of view eyepiece is 63% larger than an 18mm field of view eyepiece. Rather dramatic. If I have to scan an area of a set size, I should in theory be able to do it in 60% faster with the 23mm field of view eyepiece. I don't need to constantly be moving my stage. Okay? Even the difference between an area of a 23mm field of view eyepiece is over 9% larger than a 22mm. Okay? Leeds really offers only 2 eyepieces. We don't see any reason for quoting an 18 or a 20mm field of view eyepiece. All of our LCF and LCT products are offered with a 22mm field of view, and the Discovery and Trace Z comparison microscopes are all offered with a 23mm field of view. Some of our competitors do have multiple eyepieces available, and one way to reduce the cost of your quote, and most customers won't notice the difference at a quoting time, is to quote you a smaller field of view eyepiece. An 18mm field of view eyepiece is typically considerably less expensive than a 22 or a 23mm eyepiece. That's because you got to provide supportive optics to make this all work. It's not as simple as just making that ring inside the eyepiece bigger. We have to change the whole optical design to be able to do that. The final thing that I wanted to do was maybe just answer some questions that might come up. There is a limit to how big your brain can accept in a single position. I mean, again, having a bigger field of view, if you've got to, be like reading a book, having to move your head around to take in that whole field of view isn't really accomplishing what we want to. The idea is that with a 23 or a 22mm field of view, your brain is able to take that all in, and you shouldn't have to be searching the field of view to be able to do that. I've almost implied that this is endless. You see 18mm fields of view is the smallest. 22, 23mm is getting to be on the larger side. There is a theoretical limit. I don't know the science behind it, but I've always heard that a 25mm field of view is the max that a brain, the average human brain can take in. I had some special industrial instruments I sold back in the 80s and 90s that had a 25mm field of view, and it wasn't uncommon for us to step those down a little bit to a 23 or 24mm field of view. Some people just felt that that field of view was too big. That's really all I have for today. Hopefully that gives you some insight. Basically, the larger our field of view on our eyepiece is going to provide and define a larger field of view at a given magnification than an eyepiece with a smaller field of view number. So If you got a choice, 22, 23 millimeters, go for it. It's going to make your inspections easier. Typically, these are also the most modern computations of their eyepieces for most manufacturers, so therefore we again get that best eye relief and the most relaxed zone for where we need to place our eyeball. Hopefully that helps, and thanks for tuning in. Have a good week, and I expect Jake to be back for next week's live stream. Thank you.